welcome to another edition of Dance Mama in Conversation. Today I am thoroughly thrilled to be with filmmaker Emma Flett, who recently has made our very own Dance Mama film, and she has an extraordinary story and background herself, which has really absolutely contributed to how she can implicitly capture how a dance mama lives and lifestyle. So I'm really pleased to welcome you, Emma.
Oh, I'm so pleased to be with you, Lucy.
So Emma, you trained at the Royal Ballet School, you then went on to LAMDA, you had an extensive career in the West End, and then around 2015 you started Flett Films, and some of your clients have included the Royal Ballet School. You've just had such an amazing journey. Tell us a bit, we'll start off with, tell us a bit about the context in which you're parenting at the moment.
Oh, good question. Well, the never-ending juggle, isn't it, for all artistic mothers out there. I salute you all. And that's part of the reason why I absolutely loved making the Dance Mama film, was just to sort of storytell amazing women's juggling stories, which we are all living. My current juggle is I have 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl, and they all do millions of different activities, which I have to run them around to. One of them is a gymnast and does competitions all over the country. So I juggle all my filmmaking and workshopping and teaching around hopefully trying to put them first, but it's the juggle is real.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And just sort of to highlight there, in terms of your son, and I know your daughter as well, are very sporty, that's kind of a fantastic link back to your own physical sort of training and career that you have, and how that's sort of transformed into their passions biologically, I'm sure, but also in terms of seeing you as a role model day to day. And tell us a little bit more about what life was like when you started a family and what sort of things you were doing.
Well, yes, and that is really has been my whole motivation for wanting to support your organisation and to make the Dance Mama film with all my heart, because you know, you and I have had this conversation, but sharing it more widely, I found it hugely difficult. I was performing right up until I had my first son, and you know, I encountered fertility problems on that road before I had him. I had 3 miscarriages, and so it was very traumatic, even just, you know, just having him, and the juggling work even up until the point of having him was very difficult. I actually shot a commercial in South Africa whilst having a miscarriage, which was too dramatic and not at all what you would plan, but how life sometimes is. So when I then was holding my little boy in my arms, the thought of rushing back to work was not my first priority, but I also didn't know how on earth I was going to make it work. And perhaps because I'd had the problems in conceiving and in having a child, I hadn't really thought it through. And I was just so desperate to have a child. And as a freelancer who's going to auditions and getting jobs on a very sort of ad hoc basis, I just had absolutely no idea how I was going to make that work. And it was incredibly stressful. I was not somebody who had grandparents on tap who could step in so I could go to an audition. So just even down to costs of going to an audition and getting fit enough to go to an audition, to pay for somebody to look after somebody when you might not even get the job. I just didn't even see how that was going to work. Physically as well, and I know, you know, with Dance Mama you do a lot about things. I had a very difficult first birth, and the physio came to see me just after the birth, and in a very serious tone, said to me that I absolutely must not exercise for 6 months. And as a dancer and a performer, I was terrified of what I had done to myself. And also, you know, I knew that people who had a cesarean were told 6 weeks. So I thought, crikey, what on earth have I done that I can't exercise for 6 months? And realistically, from a work point of view, what did that mean?
Yeah.
So I had friends in the business who were trained in postnatal Pilates, and I just had to do all of that myself. You know, which is why, you know, you do all of this, and it's so amazing. But I was completely clueless and felt incredibly isolated. And the reality then was, because the problems that I had encountered, I wanted another one quite quickly. So my priority wasn't at that point to get back to work. I was, however, in charge of a dance company at that time, Urban Angels, and I had delegated that while I was having Jonah, but I was very keen to get back to running this company. And so the idea of freelancing and running a company while not being able to dance at all, while trying to have another baby and feeling terribly isolated, really highlighted to me how a community for dance mamas in the arts, just a support network offering resources and support, would have been incredible. And you didn't exist, Lucy, so thank heavens for you. So there was lots of issues going around at that time, and I was very unsure how I was ever going to get back to my career. And I know, you know, the stats on women falling out of the arts if they you know, lose their way, and that was very close to my story. What I decided to do was not go to auditions that I couldn't afford to go to with ad hoc childcare, but jobs that came to me because of my past, you know, contacts and experience. I tried to do. So I actually did, while the boys were young, I did quite a few things. I did lots of radio plays. I did 2 pantomimes. I did a play. I did a flamenco show while breastfeeding. You know, it was an insane juggle. But I was very lucky in that the work was still coming to me when the boys were young, because I just couldn't afford to be going to 5 castings with no childcare and with no guarantee of any employment at the end of it. So that was my way of sort of managing my sort of freelance headache, if you like. And I was a very, you know, sort of full-on mum, as well as juggling that work stuff. I didn't, you know, really have the finances for a full-time nanny. So it was a juggle between me and my husband. One of my other good friends in the industry was in a different financial position and was able to have full-time nannies and go on tour. That was not me, you know. So and I know that she paid more in childcare than she earned. So I know this is a you know, I'm stating the obvious, but that was the reality I found myself in. And so me and my husband made as much work as I could manage work between us, because he's also self-employed and has his own business. So that was our way of managing it. But I think one of the most difficult things was feeling incredibly isolated. So yes, all power to Dance Mama and the community that you've created.
Oh, thank you, Emma. And just to say, absolutely, I felt exactly the same as you. And I know our situations weren't, you know, total carbon copies of each other, but very similarly, particularly for the freelancers, and those in organisations do have much more support. But it's interesting you say, sort of stays the obvious. It's so obvious to us, but to so many other people, it's completely invisible within our industry and externally. And absolutely, that sense of sort of, I try and break it down into 3 areas. If you've got your kind of physiological stuff, where although we're starting research now, we are still borrowing from our allies in, sports science and other areas to have a sense of what might be the right thing to do, but there's still nothing published and concrete for the dance community to tap into in that way, or bespoke support. We do our best, but absolutely that's another area of growth that we need to focus on to really support individual journeys, and everybody's journey is so different. But also role models as well. And it's interesting to hear, because the 30% of us, and that's the sort of current stat with Pippa's COVID survey, who stay, what are the qualities you think you have lent into to stay in the game? But also what role models, and they may well be dance related or not, have really helped inspire you to keep going in really arduous circumstances? A two-parter.
That's good, but I'll digress slightly, as I always do, because I think I've got a great mishap childcare story which you'll love, which Elaine Page I know is going to publish in her memoirs because she loves it so much. But I think one of the main things that was very stressful was also me trying to hide how difficult it was.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think you do so well, Lucy, is to give voice and presence to even this conversation. And one of the sort of really stressful aspects of it was that when I was working, I felt like I had to hide the fact that I had children, or the juggle that was created because of that. And so to highlight that, I'm going to tell you one of these. I've got many, but there's one particularly good one. I was doing a radio play and I turned up at the Sound House in Shepherd's Bush, and Jonah was a 16-month-old tearaway who was at that age where he put his fingers in plug sockets and tried to run in front of cars. So it was a stressful time, and I had a friend who was an actor who was coming to the Sound House to look after Jonah there so that I could police said terrible twos, and I think I was pregnant as well with the next one, so it was like this. Anyway, he phoned me on the way there. His motorbike had broken down and he wasn't going to get there.
Oh God. And
it wasn't the most seamless form of childcare, was it? But it was the option that I had. I think he was his godfather. So and he's an actor, so he would understand the environment.
Yeah.
So I was taken by the casting director, who thankfully I'd worked with lots of times and who I knew well. And I explained what had happened. And I was taken to the area where our cast were. And the only person sat there was Elaine Page. And I'd met Elaine a couple of times, and she's absolutely lovely, but she's not a sort of childcare kind of person. But she was my only childcare option, because the director was calling me in for the scene and I had no childcare and Elaine Page was my only option. So I buttered her up, and she was absolutely delightful and so lovely and so generous. And of course, darling, of course, that's absolutely fine. But I was absolutely, it's an industrial estate that went out to sort of car parks and roads, and the door was open, and I just thought, well, Jonah, will he survive? This is, how's this going to go? But I was ushered quickly in, and then while I was there, and Laura Michelle Kelly was doing the play, and we knew each other, and while you're here, Emma, let's just do this scene, and while you're here, let's just do this, and while you're here. So I was in there forever, and I thought, when I get out, I don't know what I'm going to find. So I go out, and Elaine Page is happily chatting to somebody, but there's no Jonah.
Oh God.
So I just nervously where is Jonah? And she says, oh, Robert took him. And I'm thinking, Robert, excellent. This is parenting fail number one. A strange man has taken my child. However, it was Robert Lindsay, who was also in our play, who I hadn't met yet. And Robert had taken Jonah. Robert does have children. And he took Jonah into another sound studio, and I could see through the glass window, and he was singing Jonah to sleep. And I'd never met Robert, and I sort of loved him from that moment on, because, you know, as a desperate parent, juggling, and as I say, trying to, you know, and I wrote effusive emails to the casting director afterwards saying this will never happen again, and I'm so sorry it happened, and the sort of shame, I think, that we can feel when we're in these situations, which I honestly don't think I would feel now. I feel much more adamantly kind of strong about the fact that, you know, this is our lives as performers and we shouldn't apologize for it. But in that young mum insecurity, trying to keep your professional face together, you know, that I found that incredibly stressful. So anyway, that was just a little story for you.
What a story.
So I think probably, you know, a role model would be Robert Lindsay, because, you know, he modeled to me someone who's a parent in the industry who got it.
Yeah.
And who stepped in and knew what to do. And I think we do need those people to sort of speak up for both, you know, and there's so many artists doing it now, who are very much standing up for their identity as women and as mothers and as performers. And we need people to do that. Absolutely. So I hope I'm one of them now. But as I say, in those early days, the insecurity was very high, of thinking I'll never be employed again because, you know, I'm this juggling nightmare mother.
Well, and the thing is, again, it's kind of that identification that it's a nightmare, and you're bringing an extra problem, whereas in fact the situation and the system is failing you in that way, in not making it easy or easier for you to bring your whole self, and where you need to bring your child to work to be supportive and inclusive of that. And I think absolutely, although things are moving in the right direction, there is still an enormous amount of fear and insecurity that if somebody finds out, or somebody is inconvenienced by my parenting, I'm going to lose this job, or I'm not going to get employed again, or that, you know. And I think it's better, hopefully better, by what we've been able to do, but it's still really, really bad, in that I'm sure I will be working the rest of my career advocating, and after that. And of course, I'm not on my own doing that here. There's a whole movement now of us in lots of different ways trying to change the situation and narratives, because I'm sure you feel then and now, being a parent of 3 children, having all of those experiences, makes you a richer performer, particularly in terms of mining your life for expression, acting wise, but also in dance, and having an understanding when you're teaching of holding space for those young people, but also their families as well. And I really hope
hugely. I mean, all through lockdown, I was teaching the lovely Central School of Ballet students flamenco on Zoom, and, you know, I was dealing with my own homeschooling children, and teaching down here in my studio the lovely Central students, and feeling as much as that I was pastoring and mentoring them through the whole of lockdown as a friend and as a mother, as much as a teacher and a coach. And absolutely, I think it increases your capacity for empathy and creativity and curiosity and support 100%. So I don't think it should be anything we should be sort of trying to conceal or not celebrate from employers. I mean, from a logistical point of view, when I was doing the flamenco show in the West End and still breastfeeding my number 2 child, I found out I was pregnant with number 3. And it was at that point that I think my agent really sort of, I could hear a big sigh at the end of the phone. And again, that's another terrible sort of anecdotal story of a casting where I was sent to the casting for a commercial for a supermarket. I hadn't even told my mum yet that I was pregnant. But in that casting suite, very small casting suite, I saw the breakdown, and it said, young mum abseils down into the supermarket, and in small print, if you are pregnant, please leave the casting. And a young casting director, younger than me, she came out, and she very stroppily, like, she'd sent someone home because they were pregnant. She stood there in the very small waiting room, and she said, if anyone else is pregnant, could you please leave? And as I say, I hadn't even told my mum. And in front of a room full of strangers, I had to stand up and leave the room. I mean, I don't know if they'd get away with doing things like that these days. But on the way home, because I had to explain to my agent why I'd left the casting, that's when I told her before I told my mum.
Yeah.
And I just heard the sigh at the end of the phone. I heard the kind of, oh, Emma. And so at that point, it had already been such a juggle with the two young boys and working. It was at that point that a colleague and friend who was in charge of a drama school asked me to start teaching on a more full-time basis for him. And so while I was juggling kids and school and nursery, I did that. And so I was part of that cohort for a number of years before I started the film business, which reconnected me back in. But obviously I was teaching and I was still connected to the industry, but leaving performing at that point I found really, really hard.
I should absolutely think so. I'm like sitting here listening to this, like totally speechless of how that discrimination being so blatant. And we know even in the last 15 years, there are ways through the magic of television that could have been a special effects or some sort of way, if you had been right for that role, for that, or any of the other pregnant people in that casting who had been right for that role, to be kind of, digitally made to upset, or some kind of trickery to make it look realistic. I think that's just appalling. And I wonder now if that casting director has become a parent herself and even remembers, because I think also as well, there's a bit of a delineation between absolutely who you were before and who you were afterwards. But I'm absolutely sure I too, probably in my 20s, was saying things to other parents at work, not being a parent, that probably now I'd be hanging my head going, oh God, why have you done, of course they can't come out to the pub till 10 o'clock. They've got to go home and do bath and bed. What are you talking about? But it's trying to get that education in earlier as well, is something that we're striving towards. So for a few reasons. One, so forewarned is forearmed, I guess. Also sort of shifting the culture, but also really so young people can see that that is a possibility for them, even if they haven't started to entertain starting a family yet, that it's not a foregone conclusion that you will end your career at this specific moment in time, usually under the age of 35, and then you will do something else. And just trying to change that. But I wonder as well, in terms of the teaching, and again, that contrast between the freelance lifestyle, which is very chaotic and ad hoc, the teaching kind of aspect gave a little bit more stability, but were they also supportive, or did you feel more supportive as a parent in that context? Or supportive?
I think I was still very much carrying the, I mustn't talk about my children, and I must put my professional face on. And I don't know how much that was me and how much that was the, the organisation I was working for. I think probably a little bit of both. There was only a couple of other women, one who had children. So, it wasn't like there was a group of us in the staff room sharing our, and I do remember, the inevitable getting one ready in a, Easter parade chick costume, and another one being an Egyptian, and running off to teach students who hadn't learnt their lines and didn't know what they were doing. and getting that phone call from the neighbour who picked up the kids to say, Zach won the Easter parade, and just crying, you know, because you're like, I've managed it. I've managed to juggle this and get my students ready for the performance they're doing, but not really being able to sort of share that, you know, with anyone, because it's so ridiculous, isn't it? Who cares, you know, about the Easter parade? But you know, for your kid, that's a really big deal, and just juggling all of that and the amount of energy and effort it takes to sort of be there as a parent and support all of those little things, but be a professional at the same time. So yeah, I think we also put it on ourselves, don't we, as women, to sort of do everything brilliantly, which we can't always.
Yeah.
And we sort of have to model that to our kids as well. And I think my kids, I've always, you know, reiterated to them how imperfect I am, and I don't do everything, you know, perfectly, but they do see me being very active, and I know that does inform them as people as well, especially now they're older.
Yeah.
I think when they're little, they just want your presence, don't they? Which is really hard if you're not there. When, as they get older and they see the things that you're doing and the things that you're active in, that's a motivator and an inspiration for them, and actually helpful to their sort of education and formation, really. But I think when they're little, they just know if you're not there for the concert or you're not there for the Easter parade. And those are really hard. If you can't say to your company or who you're working for, actually, you know, I know it doesn't seem like it's important, but this is really important.
Yeah.
You know.
But, you know, there's a real kind of challenge around just the tension and the competition between trying to make, like you say, the juggle and trying to make everything work, and that makes you have to make choices on the work front and on the parenting front to try and keep everything moving forward. And like you say, you're not going to be able to hit all buttons all the time, but what I think we're trying to change is where people are really having to make decisions that otherwise they wouldn't be doing because they're a parent, which is really holding them back, and making employers try and make more alternatives. For example, you know, having two casts or sharing roles and
well, I mean, it's really, really shocking, isn't it, that there's only ever been that one job share in 42nd Street for two mothers. I mean, it's really, really shocking. You think of the amount of primary schools around the country that have job shares for year 1, year 2, year 4, year 5. You know, it's just a given, you know, that these things are facilitated. So it's quite shocking that that's a newsworthy story of one job share, one show, you know, one producer. And so I think everything that you're doing, and like you said, others are doing, to give voice to this within the arts, so that we're not losing people. Because I did feel like I left the industry when I had Caris. I didn't feel like I had a choice to sort of maintain and juggle the freelance lifestyle with 3 children. I don't regret her at all. She was an extra special surprise, which she knows, but I don't regret that at all. But that was the cost. It was just one step too many to sort of juggle. And teaching was fulfilling, but it wasn't the same, and isn't the same as performing. And so when I started my film company, I had started writing and creating and working with a couple of filmmakers. And my very first film that I made was about a pregnant ballerina. And I think I was probably cathartically working through some of my own issues of transition, which I probably hadn't. So that first film then led to my first commission for Dancers Career Development, where they wanted to make a film about women transitioning from their performing careers into other careers, which they fund and support. So I didn't know at that time that making films and being at the helm creatively of a project was going to give me, I can say now, as much of a buzz as performing did. I didn't think that anything would compare to 8 shows a week, and I missed it for a very long time. Even though I was devoted to my children and I wanted to be present and I wanted to be with them, there was nothing that compared to the buzz of performing and that release, performing, and I really missed it, and I sort of ached for it. But when I started to be at the helm creatively of making films, I absolutely felt that same creative release. And I did do one last show, which was with the wonderful comedian and friend Sally Phillips at the Leicester Square Theatre, and it was a show called Dancing with Dogs. And at the end of the show, I did a dog tango, which doesn't need explained. And the final show, Emma Thompson came, and afterwards she bought me a drink, and she told me that I'd made her piss her pants. So it ain't a BAFTA, but I'll take it. Making Emma Thompson piss her pants. For me, I just started directing and making films at that time. Sally asked me to do the show. I did the show, and it kind of felt like I'm really happy directing and being at the helm of creative projects. Really lovely, funny, joyous last show to do, where Emma Thompson buys me a drink at the end and says, "You were amazing." And that was it. I hung up my sort of performing shoes, and I'm very, very satisfied and happy at the helm of Flett Films and creating creative projects and collaborating with other artists, which I absolutely love and feeds me hugely. And especially the Dance Mama film, telling the story of, 4 amazing dynamic performers who are living that juggle, that I sort of did initially with 2, and then I didn't and then didn't quite manage. So I absolutely loved telling their story in film and celebrating them, and giving platform to these incredible artists who are doing this and who you're supporting. So I feel very sort of fulfilled now, and I hope that by giving platform to these conversations, we encourage and help other artists who might be struggling at home, thinking, I will just fold the laundry for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think there's a few things there to pick up on. One, I mean, both Emma and Sally are also mothers, and Emma recently had an article in The Guardian talking about being in her own body at this stage of life. Hope I get this right, Emma.
It was amazing. It was amazing.
But yeah, about looking at her daughter sort of in her early 20s, and then her mother at kind of the later stages of life, and just the beauty of all of that, those 3 generations together.
She's amazing. Everybody should read it. It's an uplifting article about the journey of women through their lives and our connection to each other, and celebrating that very sort of earthy connection and the generations. And yeah, she's such a great voice as an artist and a mother.
Just wonderful. And in terms of then the 4 artists in the film, I mean, when I saw the first cut, I know it's our film, but I've commissioned Emma to make it, and I looked at it and watched it, and I was just paralyzed with utter joy and just probably one of the biggest emotional responses I think I've ever had to an artistic product, because we're so closely connected in it. But just thought, oh my God, you've managed to capture exactly what that feels like, and the challenges around it, but also the beauty of all of it, and the potential that are in those people that you see in different ways in their different roles, and how that's realized. And this isn't to begrudge anyone who doesn't choose to go and follow their career, dance or not. I have hats off to also the mothers who choose not to work or don't work. It's one of the hardest jobs, and I think if it was financially remunerated, I know that Mother Pucker's done some work on this, and it was something like your annual salary would be about £250,000 a year, you know.
Yes, please.
It's one of the most undervalued in our society jobs of rearing the next generation. But the film, it just completely transcended to another space that I couldn't then function, and I was supposed to go and pick up the kids, which is quite funny, sort of wandering around to the car going, oh my God. But absolutely, in terms of the creativity you have as a teacher and a performer, and then fueling into film, I think those people who do become filmmakers and or photographers and have a background in dance, you see things differently than people who haven't, and knowing those kind of moments musically and rhythmically to capture them at their really kind of absolute peak moment to beautifully sew it all together. And
well, for me, it's like choreography.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you know, my great buddy at Royal Ballet School, who we always were competing with each other, he's done all right. Chris Wheeldon, I think he's MBE, OBE, I don't know, something like that. Anyway, we used to misbehave in each other's rehearsals to try and sabotage each other's work, because obviously we're very mature. But you know, so we were great sort of choreographic competitors, and as I say, he's done all right. But for me, it's an expression of choreography in the filmmaking, and I did put my whole heart and soul into it, and I'm so pleased that you had that emotional response, because as performers we need a visceral, emotional response, because that's the life that we're living. You know, it's not a infomercial, as we discussed right in the beginning when we were wanting to create it. It's creating the feeling that the internal journey of what it feels like to be a mother and a performer. And I will say as well, for all the dance puppers out there, that my co-filmmaker, Michael Rouse, who is an amazing dancer and actor in his own right, we very much collaborated on the film. And I think whilst obviously the focus in the film is on 4 dance mamas, you know, Mike and all his creativity and artistry and love went into it, because he's a dance pupper, and we're not forgetting the dance puppers at all. And a big shout out to Mike for what he brought to the project, because he has lived, him and his wife are both in the industry, and they are those insane double couple.
Dance Dynasty.
Yeah, Dance Dynasty, love that. Yeah. They will love that. Dance Dynasty that juggle both their professional lives and 2 kids who also are budding performers, and one of them was the leading role in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So it passes through, like you said, into the different generations. And I know from all my many conversations with fellow performers that what you said right in the beginning, that being a mother, and I know one lovely ballerina and friend, Leanne Benjamin, says she knows that her career post having her son was far deeper, more profound, more connected after she'd had a child than before. That the level of her expression and her ability to communicate as an artist was far, far deeper. And I do think we have still got a job to do in helping, you know, the people who make money out of artists, the producers, to realize this, you know, and to help us as artists enable our careers, and not see artists who are mothers as headaches or drains on their resources, but quite the opposite. And I know that the Opera House have really done that. They've, you know, and they're a different, you know, but they've really invested and supported their artists to go back to work when they've had children, and it works, and they keep their talent. And so I think we need to be modeling that and showing that, and helping other organizations to do that better.
Absolutely. I mean, just to kind of firstly pick up back on kind of the infomercial aspect that we didn't want, it was really important to me to make sure that whoever made this film really got it. And it was almost kind of serendipitous to kind of start looking and do the research to find you. It's kind of like, you know, unicorn, you know, has the dance mama experience, makes amazing films, totally would understand how to make an advocacy film and it being succinct. And I'm just so grateful because that authenticity, just, it's implicit, it's just there. And I don't think if it was anyone else it would be quite so special. So that's amazing. And again, the very reason that your parent made you uber employable for this project as opposed to not.
Yeah.
And also the messages that you from again, thank you for your generosity in what happened in regards of that commercial and casting, but the combination, I think, of having that rejection from the outset purely based on you being pregnant, one, then compounded with the not so great attitude from your agent who should have been congratulating you and celebrating that. I think absolutely there's so many pressures on parents in the sector that absolutely, you know, no matter how strong a character you are or resilient or tenacious, if you haven't got someone cheering you on and empathetically understanding what you're going through and creating the right conditions for you to thrive, it's so difficult. And just to sort of reiterate that point, when we're advocating for this lifestyle, we're not advocating for it because it's easy. It isn't. It isn't. That it is not. But is it fulfilling? Absolutely yes. And I 100% believe with my soul and every molecule of my being that people who have a talent for something should not be denied expressing that just because they've become a parent.
And that is why you do what you do, Lucy, and you're so good at it. So when and I know it's like your life's work and it's your journey and your sort of mandate, if you like, and you do it amazingly, which is why, you know, when you approached me to make the film and let's be honest, there wasn't lots of budget to work with, but I was like, we will make a killer film because of how passionately I believe we need to platform this story and this aspect. You know, we have sort of dancers who've become incredibly sort of famous through the sort of niche of like Strictly.
Yes.
And they're incredibly sort of valued in society as these sort of almost sort of demigods of people. And social media has obviously helped dancers have their own platforms, which are separate from organizations, and have shown people that sort of almost goddess-like, you know, quality that dancers can have. But there's still so much to do in educating, you know, businesses and just, you know, you know, talking about this particular aspect of it. It feels like it's this tiny little sort of niche thing, you know, but actually there's as you know, the stats in the industry, there's so many livelihoods and talent in our industry affected. We've got to do better. It's not just the Strictly dancers who are goddesses.
And
you know,
it's makers, and it's you know, having makers. The whole industry, and my background is contemporary, and it's all about making something new, do something new. If nobody does that or is given the conditions to do that, then what happens? It either gets very skewed in terms of the artistic programming with people who aren't parents, or it just completely gets minimized. And the industry is about 40,000 people large, but 80% are women. But an interesting point I keep coming back to, which actually a friend sort of it's got me thinking, a non-dance friend got me thinking about, is the audiences in the West End and for a lot of dance is also women. So if there are less of them in key decision-making positions, what we're seeing being presented and curated in front of us, is that actually representative of the audience itself? And we really have to try and change the way things are happening to retain talent that because they've started a family and otherwise they'll be lost, because again the knock-on effect all round is huge. It's huge.
Yeah, and I did talk about this a bit because I think, you know, I've been making a documentary about the arts in the pandemic, and I met so many wonderful producers and heads of theatres, and, you know, everybody was obviously having a terrible time, and, you know, I felt like I was having a counselling session with most of them, most of the time. So it was quite a privileged position to sort of hear their challenges and difficulties through COVID. But it did come up as well in some of those conversations about, you know, losing people in our industry and the kinds of people that we will lose first.
Yes.
And actually being able to recruit, you know, post-pandemic in sort of all areas of the industry, you know, actually, you're right, of the people that will go missing first, who won't be able to sort of make it back with COVID on top of everything. That did come up in conversation. So we do have to look at who's at the helm and who sort of is making these decisions and who's investing in the next generation. I do talk to either, you know, my students that I'm working with or young performers that I'm working with and coaching, some of the Royal Ballet principals, and they say to me, how do you do it, Emma? How do you do it? How do you have the profession that you have and juggle your family life? Please tell me, how do you do it? And that sense of sort of fear and anxiety and almost panic about what will happen to me, how will I make it work? And so even, you know, unwittingly, I've become that role model, you know, which younger women are saying to me, Emma, please show me how to do this, because I don't know how. And I think because I had such a sort of significant wobble at the beginning of my parenting career of thinking, I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to do this. Badly, probably. And I think that's helpful. All of these conversations are helpful and takes the fear out of it. And all that you're doing is immensely more helpful because you've got programs in place and you've got support in place and you've got a community in place. Because I think one thing that would have really helped me was just to connect with a dance mama community, to know that there's other people out there in exactly the same place that I'm in, looking at what my options are as a freelancer, as a dancer, as a teacher, as a coach. What are my options? And pooling experiences and working together, maybe helping each other out with childcare, maybe, you know, all sorts of things could come from that community and from that platform. So, you know, you're the one doing the really good stuff, Lucy, but I'm very, very happy through my work to be able to, you know, get it, to share it through the film, you know.
Absolutely. And definitely it's on all of us, really, being those role models and being that person close to another dance mama or dance papa. Absolutely. And for me, similarly, with nothing kind of there industry wise is the official place to go to or primary place to go to or anything like that. Same for me. It was kind of going to people that I knew had children, and I think I was lucky in that my boss at the time, his wife was pregnant at exactly the same time. It was like within a week. So he had a good understanding. He's a very empathetic person anyway. But also Kerry Nichols was supporting me and mentoring me for a piece, a youth dance piece that we were making for back in 2012, leading up towards the Olympics with other youth dance companies. And again, she had been parent. So I was really lucky that I'd come across or been closely connected with other people. but even so, I knew that was really unusual. And I just really felt for other people, what if you're at this point, and especially the journey, and particularly at the beginning where it changes, as soon as you've kind of mastered it, they've changed again another week, and with the goalposts keep moving, to find somebody at the same moment in parenting as you with a similar job in such a small industry, unless there was something to connect you all and a central point, how would you even find that person? And there's something very specific about us psychologically as a group, because of the training that we've had, that makes us a little bit different to people who don't work in a similar creative sector, because it's a vocation and a calling. And like you say, that need, when you're not in it, you really miss it, and it feels everything feels really out of whack. And I could only cope with that for about, I think, 6 weeks. But my way of trying to get back into it was doing mum and baby yoga or something. But I thought, God, at least I'm in a studio. This is the longest I've not been, you know, and even that wasn't exactly right, but it was sort of stepping stones towards. But then we get cases like Bethany now, Kingsley Garner, and thank you, Emma, for introducing Bethany to Dance Mama, because we can genuinely see that it has had an impact in supporting her on her maternity leave. And speaking to her very recently, she's just back in the studio. I think probably this week's her 2nd week back. But having that regular contact, you can see the difference straight away in terms of when we're more supported, funnily enough, we work better. It's a no-brainer. Emma, to wrap up, before you make Robert Lindsay an honorary member, because he absolutely should be, when people are asking you, what do you do? How are you doing this? What would be your sort of top advice?
I think a little bit of what I said earlier, touching on knowing that your creativity is actually helping you as a parent, and that your parenting is helping your creativity.
Absolutely, yeah.
So where there's a bit of guilt and a bit of pulling on your resources and on your energy, I think when you remember that at the center, whatever decisions you're making with your career or with your parenting, if you trust that actually, you know, within reason, obviously I wouldn't, you know, go on tour for 6 months and leave my children. So I'm, you know, and everybody has different, you know, I know people who have done and they've made it work and their kids have come out and joined them. Everyone has to be responsible for their own, you know, choices that they make around those things. But I think, you know, within your sort of limitations of what you are able to do, if you're, you know, authentically making decisions for the good of your family and for the good of your career, they should and could benefit each other. And, you know, I mean, there was one film shoot I did where we were doing some filming with Tom Holland. And so I was able to pick up my kids. I got permission from the head teacher to pick up my kids early from school to go and be on set with Spider-Man.
Amazing.
Quite cool. They remember it. I mean, Tom Holland, how big is he now? I mean, he wasn't quite, he was Spider-Man at the time, but now he just seems to be on everything and everywhere. So my kids have all got, you know, their pictures with Tom, and they tell all their friends, yeah, I've been on set with Tom. And it's not all about that. That's the very sort of little cherries on the cake that you get sometimes. But more than that, I think your children see that your creativity is a force for good in the world, and hopefully that inspires them. And then absolutely, I think the person that I've evolved and become as an artist would not be, had it not been for all the incredible things that my children have brought to my life, the colour, the vibrancy, the challenges, the emotions, the depth of insane love that you feel. that you then pour into your artistry. So I think that's at the centre. And obviously every artist and mother will be making different choices depending on what their commitments and financial needs are. But I think if you know that, then that's what keeps you sane.
Emma, I cannot thank you enough for everything that you've done, everything that you are doing for Dance Mama, and all those people in your community and the industry that you know and that you're influencing in such a positive, amazing, a force for good, absolutely, way that really says it in a nutshell. Emma, it's been brilliant to be able to get that insight from you today, and for people to understand that it's not just a film that we kind of threw together and didn't really think about, or and I would challenge anybody who did have that perspective, because it's a wonderful piece of art in itself, and I'm just so grateful for having an authentic Dance Mama to make it, and long may your influence and role modelling continue on the next generation.
I'm really hoping that the film is going to connect to many artists out there. That's my hope, that where they might feel unseen or unheard or frustrated, or they can't see a way through, I hope that the film connects to them and makes them feel seen and heard, and inspires them to get connected to Dance Mama, because what you're doing is amazing, and be part of the Dance Mama community and be supported to be the artists that they are. That's my hope.
Emma, I think that is a beautiful way to finish our conversation today. Emma, thank you so much. You're just an absolute legend, and I said I just can't thank you enough. Thanks, Emma.
Bless you. Lovely to speak to you today, Lucy.